Hi, my name is Dr. Alan Barnard. I'm CEO of Golded Research Labs. I'm a decision scientist and also a theory of constraints expert. It's a great honor to do this presentation today with the title, How to Ensure that AI Will Create Value in Dermatology for all the stakeholders, but answering the question through the lens of theory of constraints. There's a tremendous amount of hype and expectations around AI. Will it actually deliver? In my presentation, I will cover 6 parts. First of all, for those that are not familiar with theory of constraints, I will answer what is theory of constraints. Secondly, I will answer the question, what are the principles of technology-based value creation in relationship to the insights from theory of constraints? Thirdly, I will cover the 6 questions that you can use as a kind of an audit on why a powerful technology like AI could be necessary but not sufficient to bring real value. I will cover those generic questions, and in section 4, I will cover how these questions could potentially be answered for AI in dermatology. How AI could potentially help to improve diagnosis, treatment, customer care, but also profitable business growth. And I'll end off with some conclusions and recommendations, and then leave it open for Q&A. So let's start. What is theory of constraints? Well, theory of constraints was developed by Dr. Ellie Goldratt in the early 1990s, and it's based on a systems approach of improving systems. It views an organization as a system, and it says that a system has 5 parts. There's the goal of the system. That goal of the system, in terms of what the impact or income is that you're trying to achieve, by when and for who, will also determine the other 4 parts of a system. The second part is the work the system must do to achieve the goal, the work it does, what products it provides or what services it provides. The third part of the system is the resources it needs to produce the products and the services, enough of it to achieve the goal. It not only dictates what the resources are, but how much of each resource it is that we need. That is why it's so important to be very clear and specific around the goal of the system. The fourth part is what's the rules that we are going to be using for making decisions within the system, for deciding how we will do the work, how we will allocate the resources. Chess is a good analogy of thinking about the rules. You get 2 types of rules. You get the rules to play the game, which in the case of chess is not that difficult. You can even teach a child. The thing that makes chess so difficult is figuring out the rules to win the game. From a business perspective, those are the rules that we use for making decisions when we are designing our business, when we are planning our business, executing, and as well as continuous improvement. So what are the rules for making the decisions that achieves the best performance for the system and not for parts of the system, which is called local optimization? And then the last part, the 5th part, is what's the metrics that we will use for getting fast feedback? The lead measurements, the lag measurements, but also the compliance measurements, in that asking the question, are we actually following the rules? So you might ask, well, where's the idea of a constraint? Where does that come in? It comes in at point number 3. It says that a constraint is simply any resource that you do not have enough of to achieve the goal that you've committed to, whether that is a for-profit or for-purpose goal, an income goal, or an impact goal. So in the essence, theory of constraints helps us to find the one thing to focus on, that one thing that can change everything for us. The constraint in any business can only be in one of 5 places. We have a clear goal. If you don't, then clearly that's the one thing you should focus on, is defining a clear goal. But once you have a clear goal, the next question should be, do you have enough demand for the product or services that this business produces, organization produces, to meet the goal? If not, then that's the one thing to focus on. You have to find out what you can do to get customers to willingly pay more, buy more frequently to achieve the goal. If you have enough demand, the next constraint could be, we have enough demand, but do we have enough capacity to reliably deliver the amount of products that we need to deliver to achieve the goal within the tolerance time of the customer? So it doesn't help if a customer phones up and we have to quote a lead time of, you can only get an appointment in 3 months' time. Clearly now I have a capacity constraint. If I cannot do enough of the work within the tolerance time of the customer. The third constraint could be supply. There's some external resource that has become a constraint somewhere upstream in our supply chain. Either I can't get enough of the equipment or raw materials or consumables that is required to do the work. It could also be cash. I might have enough demand and capacity and supply, but I can go bankrupt if I don't have enough cash. So I have to manage the cash very carefully and not allow that to become a constraint. And then the last part, my favorite, is the constraint can also be management attention. The amount of things that demand our attention as managers will always exceed our available attention. So that always becomes the ultimate constraint. Regardless of where the constraint is, and you have to find out and ask yourself, where's the constraint in your business? Theory of constraints also provides us with a process of ongoing improvement. Regardless of the size of the business, the type of industry, this process always works. Step 0 is define the goal and the metrics. What are you trying to achieve? Once you know the goal, you can then say, identify the system constraint or constraints. What resource or resources don't I have enough of to achieve the goal? Once I have identified those resources, before I go and get more of them, I first must check, am I really utilizing what I've got? So step 2 is decide how to better exploit rather than waste my scarcest resource. And most of the time, the most common way that we waste our scarce resource is we're using it to do stuff that's not needed. So we are trying to satisfy demand that's not within our target market, or we're wasting capacity producing products or services that are not needed or not for our target market, or we're wasting supply or cash or even management attention. So normally the first step in that, decide how to exploit this, is essentially what can we stop doing. Once we know that, we have to figure out what must we start doing. Step 3 says subordinate everything to this decision. Any policy or behavior or measurement that's in conflict with the decision how to better exploit and not waste it, I need to modify. And this is very much depending on where the constraint is. If I have a capacity constraint, I can sell whatever I can produce. I only want to produce one product or service. And as a result, I don't want to switch. Because every time I switch, I lose capacity, I lose cash, I lose management attention. Subordinating everything to it says anything that is in conflict with that policy, I should change. But what if a constraint moves? Then if I don't have enough demand to sell whatever I can produce, maybe I'll have to add additional products or services. That's what elevated the system constraint is. But then I will have to change the rules. I might have to add additional products and switch over from time to time. So elevating the system constraint is if in the previous steps I'm exploiting to the most the capacity, the demand, the cash, the supply that I have, my management attention, I'm not wasting anything. If it's still not enough to achieve the goal, then go and elevate the system constraint. Go and add more products, add more capacity, add more supply, add more cash, hire more managers. And then the last step, step 5, is a warning. Do not let inertia become the constraint. Go back to step 1, and that provides me with a process of ongoing improvement. So to end off with this question, where is the constraint in your business? That is a question that also has an impact when it comes to the technology that we are going to be deploying. So think about that step 3, subordinate says, only make changes that will help me better exploit or elevate the constraint. Don't make any changes that's not going to help that. If it doesn't strengthen the weakest link, don't do it, because else it won't strengthen the system. So that's the principles for technology-based value creation that Dr. Goldratt developed. He said that the implications of theory of constraints on technology is the following. Principle number one, a technology can bring benefits if and only if it diminishes an existing limitation. So if the technology does not diminish or remove a real limitation or constraint, by definition, it cannot create value. If you are expecting to get benefits from AI, are you clear in your mind what is the value that it will create by checking what is the constraints or limitations that it will diminish? The second principle, and this is by far the most important eye-opener for everybody and warning to everybody. Think about it. Before the availability of this technology, people developed rules and behaviors, modes of operation to accommodate or live with the existing limitations. These old rules, if they remain in place, the technology cannot create the full value of diminishing or removing the limitation. It will be as if the limitation is still in place. So let me give you a practical example of that. Have you ever wondered why businesses do budgeting on an annual basis? Well, the past limitation was simply the time it took to do budgeting. It took a long time to gather all the data, all the demand forecast, all the supply projections, all the costs, likely costs, etc., put that all together and come up with a budget. So what was the old rule? Because it took such a long time, and we don't want to waste people's time just doing budgeting, we want them to do the work, we had a rule that says let's do this only once per year. But now with the advent of new technology, enterprise planning systems, resource systems, software that can gather all that information on a daily basis or at least a weekly or at most a monthly basis, we are still doing budgeting once a year as if the limitations still exist. That rule that we've put in place to acknowledge a limitation, we never thought about what rules should we change to acknowledge that we've overcome the limitation. So that's a practical example, and I want you to think about that from the context of AI. What limitation in your business can AI diminish? That is what will ultimately determine whether you could get value from AI. But what will determine if you actually realize the value is whether you have identified all the old rules that helped you to live or cope with that limitation and have actually changed those rules. So this is where the 6 questions of why technology is necessary but often not sufficient to bring value comes in that Dr. Alan Barnard developed. He said the first question is be very clear on what's the real power of this technology. When a new technology is introduced, your first responsibility as a professional, as a business owner, is to really understand the true capabilities of this technology. Then the next question is, what limitation does this technology diminish, not generally, but specifically for me, in my profession, in my business? Identify then those specific limitations or constraints that the technology can diminish or overcome, and the value that this will create for all stakeholders. Because you are going to have to compare the cost or investment of this technology, and you want to compare it with the benefits it can unlock. And if the benefits is an order of magnitude more of the cost or investment, then it's a no-brain decision. So it's really important to understand what limitation the technology can diminish now that you understand the true capabilities and what will be the benefits that it can generate as a result. And then comes the next question. What are the old rules that helped you accommodate this limitation? Recognize that there's existing behaviors and processes that were developed to work around the limitation. For example, why is it that despite the advent of computers in the 1960s and 70s already, still today, most of the records is done in analog mode? You come into the practice, you have to fill out a form in your own handwriting. the same information that you constantly provide. That's a major limitation. It delays the process time for getting a new patient that comes into the practice to be seated in front of the doctor. But it also causes a lot of frustration with that, and sometimes can result in errors when the poor person doing the admin can't read their handwriting. Why are we doing that? Because we had an old rule that was the way it worked. The patient comes in, we give them a form on a clipboard, and they have to fill in the clipboard. We never thought about changing that old rule. What is the fourth question? It's, now that we understand our old rules that helped us to live with the limitation, what should be the new rules that should be used now so that we can fully capitalize or leverage the full power of the new technology? And then how can the technology be improved to enable this required rule change, to make it almost impossible to follow the old rules and to make it almost mandatory to follow the new rules? And then the last question is there a problem in the business model itself? How can we improve the business model for deploying this technology to ensure that it is a win for all stakeholders? And this is a big question mark for AI. There's now a common saying that almost every presenter that I've heard uses that says, AI is not going to take jobs. What is going to take jobs are humans that use AI. That's what's going to take jobs away from AI. But it's not that simple. AI has the real potential for taking away real jobs. Think about it. AI today is the worst it will ever be. The speed at which it can do things. For example, if I did this manual presentation by myself, this would take me probably a couple of hours or maybe even a day or two to do. If I give ChatGPT a very clear instruction of exactly what I wanted to do, it will do it in seconds. So the person that used to help me prepare these presentations, make sure that it's clear and reasonable with nice graphics, they don't have a job anymore. I haven't given that job to another human that can use the AI. I can do it myself. And you will soon find businesses that are 1, 2, 3 people businesses that are doing not just tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars simply because AI has completely replaced human beings. So we have to really think about, if we don't want massive resistance against the technology of the adoption of a technology, we have to think carefully about what will make it a win for all stakeholders. Because if it's a lose for one or more stakeholder, it can substantially delay and maybe even block the adoption of it. So we need to think about the strategies that we need, the incentives that we need. For example, one of the companies I've worked with in India has come up with a remarkable rule. They said that the benefit, the ROI from technology must be so big that unless they can afford to pay the salary of the person that will replace for life, they won't adopt it. That is the win for the people that will go out of a job, is that the company can afford to keep on paying them a salary for life. Now that's a very high threshold for technology, but it really makes you think about it, is that the technology must be a win for all. So how can we apply these 6 questions to AI in dermatology? What's the power of AI in dermatology? It can accurately diagnose skin conditions through image recognition much faster, much more reliably than any human being can. Certainly in the future it will, but it's already there. It can provide personal treatment recommendations. It can better predict patient outcomes. It can automate routine tasks, and it can continuously learn and improve from new data. As I mentioned, it's the worst it will ever be. It will just get better, better, better all the time. So what was the limitations that this technology can remove? It can diminish the limitations such as subjective visual assessment, having to use time-consuming manual diagnosis, limited access to specialized care, the potential for human error, and the challenge of keeping up with the latest research and treatment options that took up an enormous amount of time for dermatologists and their other specialists. So what were the old rules that we used to live with these limitations? We had standardized guidelines for assessments. We couldn't create individual assessments for every single patient. We had infrequent screening protocols. Only do this once a year or once every 5 years, even though it's something that you might want to continuously monitor and catch it before it becomes too late. We had analog patient records, as I mentioned. We had the need to consult with specialist colleagues. There was patients being advised to get second opinions because of mistakes that can be made. Continuous education and certification to stay up to date with the many new developments in their field. Can you imagine how could you ever compete with ChatGPT? It's constantly learning. It will always be up to date. So, what are the new rules we should use now? We should start looking at under what conditions can we put our trust into AI-assisted diagnosis. There's massive resistance against this, but is it really worse than human subjective opinions? There's a lot of bias in human subjective decision making, but not just bias, there's a lot of noise. There will be difference for the same patient if it was assessed by different doctors. And even that same patient, if they are assessed at different times, there will be a different assessment by the same doctor. AI do not suffer from this level of bias and noise. Utilizing AI for preliminary assessments or earlier detections, relying on AI for evidence-based treatment and recommendations, embracing continuous collaboration between AI, and ensuring, of course, data privacy and ethical use of AI, even though we've digitized everything. Improving the technology itself, will have to implement some improvements, else it simply won't be adopted. So it has to be user-friendly. It must provide comprehensive training built into it through little videos that can show you how it works, or by interacting with the AI to say, show me how this works. It must encourage patients to use AI-based apps for ongoing screening. Ensuring transparency in AI decision-making and continuously updating the system so it's very clear when a decision is being made by AI versus by a human. And fastly implementing robust data and security measures. And then lastly, how can we enhance the business model to encourage full adoption, make sure it's a win for all? The business model should be based on the goal of it must be a win-win-win for every stakeholder, at least all the critical stakeholders. It must foster a culture of continuous learning. It must provide and promote collaboration between AI developers and dermatologists. We must implement pilot programs to gather feedback, to learn as quickly as possible, introduce humans into the loop. We must celebrate and learn from both the successes and the failures. And we must offer incentives for early adopters. So the final conclusions and recommendations, I would highly encourage you, if you are not doing it, to leverage AI in dermatology, but to use these 6 necessary but not sufficient questions to better understand how to leverage AI to ensure it can provide improved patient outcomes, create real value for investors and for the professionals on hand, and to streamline the work of dermatologists so that you can massively scale to cope with the increased demand for these services. Addressing the challenges and concerns, the successful integration of AI in the dermatology will require addressing all the potential resistance and fears. For me, there's a difference between an offer and a product. The offer addresses all the yes buts of all the various stakeholders. So for those that are in the space of developing AI products, think about what you need to offer so it can address all those potential yes buts that are based on resistance and fear. And it must foster collaboration environment between developers and professionals. So continuous improvement and adaptation is the key of the game. My favorite quote is, we do not learn from experience, we learn from experiments. Ongoing and refinement of the technology, business model, and user behavior will be crucial to unlocking the full potential of AI and transforming the field of dermatology to ensure that AI is not only necessary, but can be sufficient to unlock true value, real value, and order of magnitude more value for all the stakeholders involved. Thank you for your attention, and I'll open it up now for any questions. If you want more information about the work that I do and my research lab do, You can go to goldredresearchlab.com or dralanbarnard.com, or to see a range of the decision support apps that we've developed to help people make better, faster decisions in their life and in business. You can go to harmonyapps.com.